It's a great pleasure. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, everybody. I've been involved in these for as long as I can remember. And I've seen knowledge management come and go. And what I want to do today is just to try and pull what you've heard into perspective around this term and show you how actually some organizations have really used a lot of the techniques that we're talking about and got real value out of this process. Now, there is nothing worse than at 6 o'clock at the evening of a conference that started at 9 o'clock to get somebody talking about standards, and especially ISO standards. Now, 2 days ago I was in London. I was in London yesterday, but at the start of a conference called the KM Summit, one of the team of the ISO working party that I sat on to develop the knowledge management standards, he stood up and he gave a bit of a presentation. At the end of that presentation, somebody asked the question, how on earth can you make standards fun? I didn't want to stand up and say, read the KM Cookbook, but I did want to say that. And actually, that, by the way, who knows who that person over there is? Some of you heard him speak. Thank you. I told him he looked like Rick Stein. See the likeness? Which is actually quite a good thing, given that we're writing about a cookbook. The lady in the middle is our third author. She has the distinction of being the only person in the world who is a qualified ISO KM auditor. Nobody else. And it won't be for a few years. She was the head of KM for the US Nuclear Regulatory Agency, and she used to shut down nuclear plants. So she knows a few things about auditing. And what she can tell you about the ISO KM standards was, oh my God, this is not going to help anybody. But actually it does. I'm not going to defend it because I was part of the process, but what I am going to do is tell you a little bit about this thing I'm standing in front talking about. Now, we all know where that is, and there is the most wonderful restaurant. Okay, Luis will remember.
Yes, I do.
What do we have?
Nice seafood all over the place.
Exactly. Luis was actually there with Chris and a couple of others. It was at one of these events in 2017, I think, and we started talking about this idea of standards, and we said, how on earth can we make this fun? If it comes off, and there was a lot of criticism at that time, it was one of the things that you didn't want to be was on the KM Standards Committee if you were in knowledge management, because you were subject to derision by absolutely everybody. All the great thinkers of knowledge management were lining up to attack it, okay? A few years earlier, I'd actually written along the lines of what do the people at the C-suite understand? They understand risk and they understand quality. Now, this starts to give you something like that. So we said, when this thing came out, which it came out at the end of last year, and here's the thing, which always amuses me. Is this true or false? What do you think? Hands up those who think it's true. That statement, the world's first international knowledge management standard. This is straight from BSI, British Standards Institute. What do you think, true? Yes? Okay. Can anybody tell me why they think it's false? Good answer. Well, it does, because people have been thinking about this for a long while, and the nuclear industry in 2005 spent a lot of time developing a standard, but it didn't actually go too far outside the nuclear industry, partly because it was as dry as dishwater. So one of the challenges for us was, if we were going to write something, how could we make it interesting that helped to dispel the myths, misunderstandings and misconceptions? I don't want to go into the standard in detail because you haven't got the time or patience. Explain and unpack the standard beyond box ticking and provide an opportunity to inspire. And here's the key word, and this is, I will spend a few minutes on that, a framework for evaluation. So, we decided after a lot of teeth gnashing, because we started off thinking about cocktail makers, And we realised that in many of the constituencies we were dealing in, cocktails weren't necessarily de rigueur. We were going to face a little bit of opposition. And so we used the metaphor of the restaurant because actually, as you've already seen and talked about, conversations happen with neutral space and neutral objects. And part of those neutral objects are often food. Now, the British in the room would treat fuel as food as a fuel. Whereas everybody else in Europe, and I'm delighted to say I'm European because I'm a Portuguese citizen as well, one of the great things is food is something you savour and you sit down and have conversations over. So we use the metaphor of the restaurant and everything to do it to actually serve up the standard on a plate. So the second half of the book, and this is what I will talk to you about, explores 16 different examples of knowledge management in practice through the words of their KM chefs. So what we did, we actually went to, as I said, 16 organisations in Asia, in the Middle East, in Europe, in North America, and actually in South America. And we got them to narrate their story. We spent a lot of time understanding what they were doing, and we got them to narrate their story. So each of their chapters, their stories, is about 3,500 words, which is a hell of a lot for a book. So if you want to know anything about how some of these people have set about this and how they set to match up against the standard, this is the place to come and find it. And like most challenges, we found if you give somebody a standard, it's boring, right? People just don't get it. So what we decided to do was to try and look at it along the, people look at business canvases. We decided you needed something like a knowledge management canvas, which is the chef's canvas. And each of these, and I'll show you in a minute one of them, each of these maps to a section of the standard, and moreover, what we're aiming to do is to demonstrate how organisations have exceeded the standard, not just in our view met it. So I'm going to just cover 3 of the 16 in very broad outline, and I'll start with the idea of strategic context. That maps directly to those aspects of the standard, and we talk about how well is knowledge management aligned with the strategy and objectives. We talk about who our external stakeholders are. How many of you are familiar with Heinz baked beans? Okay, a few. There are 57 varieties of Heinz. That's what they say on the tin. There are 57 questions in the chef's canvas. That was deliberate. We wanted, as we said, to create something that was slightly whimsical with a bit of fun that made it enjoyable to read. So, what we also did was we consolidated the highlights from each of the chapters, and we called it the chef's specials. Here's a couple of the chef's specials. So we called it a smorgasbord of tasty bites. Okay, this, in my view, is one of the best examples of knowledge management, knowledge transfer in the world. Okay? The Olympic movement really started thinking about this at Sydney, and it's developed quite significantly. Every Games has the previous Games in attendance, but moreover, it has at least 5,000 to 7,000 people from the next Games shadowing it. So when the Russians were getting ready for Sochi, they actually came to London and spent time shadowing the London people. And what Chris and his team at the Olympic Committee do, the IOC Knowledge Management team, they're actually going round making sure that the 40 guides, just guides alone, the 40 guides that the Olympic movement actually produces are relevant for the next Games. At the end of the London Games in 2012, a team of 300, including Lord Coe, who was the president of the London Committee, went to Rio and they undertook a 5-day after-action review. Massive exercise. So they capture an awful lot. Now, the reason I'm showing you that picture is what they've done is used new technology, augmented reality, virtual reality, and they create like a Google map, an image as you go through, and they throw up little knowledge nuggets as people are going through. So if you are, say, at the ticket desk, what are the sort of things that you might be looking at? So anybody who's involved actually gets to understand what the last games did, and that knowledge gets passed on each time. The World Bank you've all heard of, and bear in mind we spent time with each one of these. So these are, you can't read that very well, I apologise. However, what I would tell you is the World Bank has about 100 gold standard projects, and they want anybody in the world to, who needs to know anything about it, to actually have a place they can go and find it. Now, Dave and others in the KM space would say a knowledge base is not really worth the paper it's not written on. However, what these guys have done, which actually has great merit, I think, is they've used artificial intelligence and algorithms, and they've used the experts to start to develop the knowledge that's gone into the creation. So the identification, they're curating using technology, but also their own expertise. So they had a guy they hired from Ford who was a technologist, and he and his team working under Margot's jurisdiction have created this amazing record. And this is a quote from one of the people in the field. It's all about projects. It's all about finding out what they know on a particular subject. So that's why we put it under codification and custom. We think it's a great example and curation rather. We think it's a great example. The last one you may not have heard of, however, it is a branch of the Ministry of Defence in the UK. This was a coup to actually get the Defence Science and Technology labs to be willing to talk in the way they did is quite a coup. We were quite proud of this. The reason we were interested was because, for me, this is a great example of augmented search. What they've done is said, okay, we have, let me read to you what they started with, right? They said, DSTL's KIM program, its aim is to prevent organisational amnesia, to avoid repeating work while they or others, which they or others have already done, and to ensure all advice given is based on solid foundations. Here's the kicker. With the need to access information often decades old, DSTL need to be confident about information authenticity. Here's an example. When they were ordering the new aircraft carrier that the UK has commissioned, is about to be launched, they had to go back to the Second World War in 1944. For the grabbing technology, they didn't have it anywhere. So they had to go back over. So in some organisations, this is why they've got an information architecture like this. They're having to go back over records that could be 100 years old. In Afghanistan, when they were working in Iraq, they found it was very different than working in Afghanistan. They needed to be able to go back and find stuff that was almost centuries old. Okay, so hopefully I've got you there. I just wanted to give you this health warning because I know a lot of you are driven by quality. A restaurant run by people who've read a catering manual have no culinary experience, use incompatible ingredients and possess a limited understanding of what their customers want to eat is surely doomed to fail. We think it's the same in knowledge management. Don't just read and follow the standards. They're a great framework, but you've got to have the right usual people, process and technology in place. Here's the key thing, is a good understanding and the understanding of the organisational context in which knowledge management is operating. I am here to say to you that is worth 25 euros to you. If you pre-order, it will be released on the 9th of August. If you pre-order, there's about 100 people already have. If you pre-order, you can have that for, I'm told, $19.98 as opposed to $39.95. So thank you for listening. I hope you found that a very rapid, interesting run-through.